Hi, guys. Welcome to the Dot Wave podcast. And apologies if I sound off today. I am sick. But today we'll be talking about amp sims and drum machines, just stuff like that, and how it compares to the real thing, when they're better to use, when it's better to use, the opposite, and advantages they might have over real drums and vice versa. I myself, when I was younger, I used a lot of electronic drums, and I still do here and there, but I tend to use real drums when I can. Live drums, if you will. Real kind of sounds like I'm talking shit. I'm not. I like electronic drums. I think they're cool. And, even when I do use live drums, generally I'm, sample layering over them with the sample libraries that come with it. I used Steven Slate 4 when I was growing up. I say floor? Steven Slate 4 when I was growing up. And nowadays I'm using Get Good drums. Those are so good.
Dude. Beautiful.
Very, 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 very good sounding, very crisp. One thing that I like about electronic drums, especially, is that I can use them to demo out an idea and have it sound close to, a final product pretty quickly. I don't have to set up mics, which takes, half an hour. I don't have to tune the kit, go down, sound check. Like, I think for demoing purposes, that's the best thing about electronic drums is they are right at your fingertip. I really, really love that. Extremely convenient. And, a lot of people don't have access to a great drum room or, decent mics or anything like that. And it takes a lot of money to invest in that. It's much cheaper just to get a sample library that, to be honest, most average listeners won't be able to tell if it's real or not. They just don't have the ear for that. Who cares,
it's totally true.
Yeah. I mean, who cares if it sounds good, right?
Yeah, as long as it does sound good, man. That's what really, takes the cake there. As long as it slaps, you're in game. You're in business.
Yeah. What's some things that you do to make drum samples sound more realistic, or drum machines, I should say?
Could you repeat that?
What's some things that you do to make drum machines sound more realistic?
Something that I do personally is I adjust the velocities pretty often on specific parts. If there's a drum roll that's supposed to be building up in intensity, of course I'm going to bring that velocity down and slowly increase it to its peak where it's going to move into a fill or whatever have you. On breakdowns, adding some little snare ghost notes, that kind of makes it feel a little more alive and real. And I don't know, I guess this does make a difference. Just good preamp, I suppose. I'll run everything through a preamp or some kind of emulation as of lately from the Slate mix rack. And then for that kind of adds more fullness, more breath to it, I feel like, warmth.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
A humanizer, even. You can get a humanizer. Reaper's got a humanizer that just works. Helps out a lot.
Humanizing is super important when it comes to electronic drums. Although it is funny because if we're going to compare them to real drums, the thing to do in the metal scene now is you take away pretty much all the humanization. You pretty much just tab all the transients or map them all to the grid, right? And then you layer in samples, and the samples are usually one-shots nowadays. So It's funny how we've gone, from the school of thought where you try to do your best to make it sound like a real kit still, to where people are like, fuck that, just make it sound big. That's what I want. Make it consistent.
Every hit is very aggressive.
Well, and it's easier from a mixing standpoint to mix something that's more consistent like that. So I kind of get that too.
Yeah. You were telling me about that a couple of weeks ago, I think.
Yeah. And I do think, even if the samples aren't humanized in their velocity, the drums underneath of them certainly will be, because an actual drummer isn't, hitting at 127 every single time they hit something. So there's still going to be, some ebb and flow between your live drums and your samples, and it'll give it that more human feel. For me personally, the thing that I think really separates live drums from drum and whatever you want to call it, instruments or drum libraries. I don't know what's the word for it. Drum VSTs, right? Drum sample libraries. But the thing that separates them to me is the overheads. Live overheads just have so much more just life to them. It's hard to explain, so often with overheads and sample libraries, you won't have a lot of movement with them, but a real drummer they'll hit things I guess what I'm trying to say is their stick won't hit something in the same exact place every single time. Where in a sample library, they're trying to make it as consistent as possible, right? So when a drummer is playing a cymbal, if it has, a swing, he's like moving his arm left and right a little bit. He's hitting it in different spots. It's all those little things add up, and they make the overhead sound much more real.
Those nuances like that.
Yeah, you can't capture that in a sample library, unfortunately. That is one of the limitations. I mean, you can get close. I do know some sample libraries will have like different samples for like hitting. Take, for example, with Get Good Drums or with Slate, there's like 10 different hi-hat samples in there, and they're all hitting the hat differently at different points, where it's open a different amount. And the best way to get your hi-hat to sound realistic in that case is you use a combination of all of them. You think, okay, at what point in the pattern would the drummer have it slightly more open? Like, does this make sense?
Yeah.
And if you take time and you really, pay attention to the details like that, you can get a much better result than if you're just lazy and you just put everything on one track.
Yeah, in that case, dude, I used to do that all the time, and my drums came out very mechanic. They did not sound very natural. Looking back, I was still very excited because it was like the freshest drums that I'd ever heard that were also digital.
Yeah.
But looking back, like I was never impressed. I'm not impressed, I should say, at this point.
Yeah.
And now going through those little bits, kind of combing through the process of mapping drums, they've definitely gotten better. And a lot of samples and I guess just the technology in developing them has gotten better to where we do have things like GGD that sound incredible. There's a band called Dead Crown. They do like a 50-50. When I was talking to the guy who produced them, it's their guitarist, Eric. Definitely check them out. They're a great band. They're really cool.
Sure.
And he would do all MIDI program drums on the shells, and then he would do live overheads, and he would just have his drummer play on like a hybrid kit. And it sounds dope. It sounds great. Their drum production's massive. They have the benefits of like clean, great sounding samples and the life that you're talking about with actual overheads, real overheads.
I've heard of that. I remember. Do you remember the band Villains? I think they changed their name to Youth Forever.
I think so. Yeah.
So I forget where I got the stems for one of their songs. It might have been from a stem sharing group, but like the producer who did the song put them up there. Maybe he was a member of the band, and they did that as well. The hybrid, like real overheads with MIDI shells. That's a cool compromise. I think if you're able to do that, you should do that. But still, in an ideal world, live kit, lots of microphones running through decent gear, and then you can put samples over it. You're not going to beat it. Like, it's just going to... I guess the way to say it is it gives it more of its... it gives each album its own unique sound versus a sample library where you can change the drums in a sample library, but like you're never going to make that particular drum in the sample library sound like something it's not,
Totally.
You won't get the same effect as adding it on top of a real kit that's a different drum set than the one in the library. And I don't know, drummers are an important part of a band. Like I remember when I was younger and I played in a deathcore band with the drummer, he was always trying out new cymbals, just thinking of things I wouldn't think of. He's like, maybe darker cymbals would be better for this kind of music, just washier. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that sounds cool. And he got the Meinl, hand-hammered dry cymbals, the dark ones, whatever they're called. And they were wonderful. Wow, they were wonderful. They're fucking expensive. Drums are expensive, man.
They are very expensive. You thought guitars were an expensive hobby, dude.
Oh, dude. Guitars aren't. I mean, I paid money for my guitars, right? Like my Jazzmaster wasn't cheap, but now that I have it and it's got the mods I want, it's cool.
Totally.
Like I just got to get it set up every once in a while or get it some, just get my luthier to touch it every once in a while, but certainly not as expensive as replacing my cymbals or something. Like, oh, dude.
No way, dude.
Cymbals are so pricey, especially good ones.
If you're recording yourself or say you are an engineer and you want to do live drums, you've got to go and get yourself an interface, the microphones, cables, stands, the kit, all these elements that factor into a fairly heavy price tag, man. And especially if you want to be kind of creative with it, maybe mess with different mics down the road. Of course, it's not an all-in-one purchase. I mean, maybe for some it is, but you could build these things over time, but it still adds up. Whereas with a digital program, you spend a couple $100.
Yeah.
It's a tough battle. Like even myself, I would love to get into live drums more. It sounds so fun. The challenge of it is what sounds fun. Whereas right now it's just mapping.
It's challenging and it's more work, but I think, like I was saying, it turns out better if you put in the work. I mean, you have to edit it, which takes a long time. Drum editing is it's an art form, I would say. If you can do that efficiently,
dude, I'm sure.
you are a wizard. Same with like vocal tuning. Excuse me, 1 second.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. No, tuning is insane.
At least I muted my mic. Like I said, guys, I am sick, so I'm gonna try to mute my mic when I'm hacking stuff up, but no promises.
Oh boy, to stay out of the splash zone.
Well, remember with live drums, you also have to treat your room as well. That's another thing. So it's not just microphones, it's not just drums. It's a huge investment. It really is. In my case, definitely. I have to have a snake that can run all the way downstairs so I can record the drums, right? That's also an investment. Yeah, not everybody can afford that. And I will tell you, as somebody who does live drums, I constantly find myself wishing that I had more microphones to play with. So it is a never ending, you're always going to be spending money on it. Yeah.
Oh, totally, dude. You want to just be creative. That's like the itch the entire time is you want to experiment, have fun, and find new sounds. And kind of like what we talked about in our last episode, just that work-life balance, if you want to call it, life being the experimentation part. You want to enjoy that while you can.
Yeah. Well, experimentation is the thing that keeps this interesting, right?
Yeah.
That's basically what we were getting at. If you don't experiment, you do the same thing every time, then it just becomes a job after a while.
Yeah, it loses its punch, dude. There's no excitement. That motivation just didn't. It goes away.
This is art. You're supposed to try new things and be daring. I mean, I respect, like we were saying last time, I respect producers that try new things and fail sometimes than the producers that are very safe with every production.
Totally. Yeah, push the limits a little bit. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Whether that be on live drums or guitars. I mean, that's really across the board. Yeah. Something else I thought of with live drums too is having like roommates and stuff. That was one of the problems I always had. Was I've always had neighbors or roommates around. It made it difficult for me to be able to do live drums because they are loud, and your neighbor or roommate might say, "Oh, don't worry about it." But when there's live drums banging around for like 4 to 8 hours a day, I feel like they might think a little differently after that.
Yeah. I'm lucky enough to live with a roommate that I played in a band with. And he owns the house.
So dope.
So that's cool. That's excellent. But we do have neighbors. We actually haven't done live drums here at this new setup.
Oh, no kidding.
We're going to find out pretty soon what's going to happen. Granted, the basement, these are brick buildings. The noise ordinance is generous. And the basement is quiet. Like, you can't hear much from the basement because it's a brick basement, built into the ground.
Totally.
So we'll see. I think we'll be okay. I've had a lot of people tell me they used to have band practices in row homes like this, and they never had complaints from neighbors. So we'll see. But
high hopes.
Yeah, but you're right. It is sketchy when you do that the first time in a new place. People might be nice for a little bit, but when you do it too much, you never know when that threshold is that you're going to cross.
Yeah, it's like a shock value almost, because then all of a sudden there's a cop at your garage door. Man, sorry, like you're just having some fun, man, recording or jamming, whatever.
I will say drum libraries have gotten much better sounding than they were 10 years ago. I upgraded from Stephen Slate 4 to Get Good Drums, and the increase in quality is dramatic. I mean, to me, Stephen Slate 4 was the sound of the 2010s. It was that older generation, and it's really changed. It sounds a lot less... How do I put this? It sounds a lot less plasticky. The top end is not... Something about the Stephen Slate 4 top end, when you boost it, it gets like sizzly and not in a good way. The top end on the Get Good drums are more like actual drums where they, have air to them, which is nice. And when you boost the top end on a snare, it gets like that tick sound rather than just like a sizzle. But the Stephen Slate samples are also heavily processed, honestly.
You can hear it. Oh, totally.
Oh, yeah.
As I've mixed with them for so long, I've kind of like learned that, and that was kind of like the first less is more lesson that I learned is like on the kicks and snares, so much less is needed. I mean, I used to just crank compression and crank transient clipping. And then I finally I heard it a couple years ago and I was like, man, I really don't need to be doing this. Like, that doesn't make sense. It was when I started referencing more, is when I realized I'm overkilling these drums because they're already so processed.
Yeah, on my last production that I did, which was the last one that I used Steven Slate drums on, I had that same, not realization, I knew it, but as I'm looking at my reference, I'm like, I don't need to compress this kick drum. Like, it's definitely been compressed when they were
Totally.
sampling it, and it's
Yep.
obvious. Yeah. I think on the kick, maybe I just did like EQ and saturation. It might not even have compression on it.
Yeah,
Like sometimes,
that's all I do on my kicks with this SSD4 stuff anymore.
sometimes it doesn't need it.
Yep. I mean, maybe like parallel compression. Of course, I'll like bus everything there. Maybe that's kind of where
Yeah.
I'll rely on that extra bit of attack,
Sure.
especially on the
sure.
kick, but on the snare, I feel like I always transient design that. Never compress though.
Yeah.
Those things
Yeah.
are pretty straight.
You run not a hybrid setup, but you use a Midi kit, correct?
Yes.
That's something that I wish that I had too. I wish I had the space in my room for it.
It's a
Because
nice little thing, man.
Yeah.
Keeps everybody
yeah.
involved. Gives you
Yeah.
something to tinker around with, and
Yeah, playing drums is super fun. When
It is.
I worked at Apollo, I used to have downtime in between sessions, and there would just be a drum kit there. So I'd be like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna play drums."
Oh, it's
And,
fun, dude.
Yeah, very very fun, very very fun, and I got pretty decent at it. Like all things music, the more you do something, especially if you're already a musician, right, and you know an instrument, you understand that all it takes to get good at an instrument is playing it enough. You
Yes.
just practicing it. And I don't know how it is for you, but for me, I never did a whole lot of actual practicing. I mostly just either learned songs when I was younger, and then when I got to a certain age, I'm like, I am just going to write songs now. I stopped learning them for the most part. So
Yep.
um,
Same dynamic here.
yeah, I really am the type of person who just learns by doing. The more I touch my guitar, the better and more solid I'm going to be at it. I'm going to try new
100%.
things and experiment. And it is nice to learn other people's stuff every once in a while to give yourself a new perspective. But anyway, that's
Yeah.
off topic. Off topic. No.
Easy to go.
Yeah. So, do you have anything else to add about electronic drums?
Other than the off-topic stuff I was about to jump on with you, man, if it's within your price range and it's something that you're interested in, I highly recommend you check out digital drums. But if you can go the route of live drums, you won't regret it. Once you get to a point where you can work with them and manage them, I feel like it's far worth it.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I wanted to add about MIDI drums and live drums is when I switched over to working with mostly live drums, that was a hard transition because I would try to do the things I learned on MIDI drums and it would not translate well to live drums.
I could imagine, huh?
So that's why I think it's important as early as you possibly can to start working with live drums because you can be limiting yourself if you don't.
There we go. That makes sense, man.
Yeah. Now, granted, what was I not good at back then? Everything. That was a couple years into doing this. I'm better at EQing now. I have a better understanding of the fundamentals of EQing, especially with SSL channel strips, which is mainly what I use. I understand compression better. But yeah, those first couple mixes jumping in with live drums were pretty rough, man. And it felt impossible to get it to sound like the way I heard other people's records, and it still can feel that way sometimes. So definitely the earlier and more often you can mess with stuff like that, I highly, highly recommend doing so.
I would love to pick your brain at some point about the differences between those two. I never really thought about that.
Sure. Well, why not right now?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Now seems like an appropriate time, right?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, one more thing before we get into that. I also wanted to add that when it comes to live drums, depending on the genre, you might not need to mic it up like a full rock kit. You might not need mics on every single drum, 2 overheads, 2 pairs of rooms, an omni room. You might not need all that shit. Sometimes all you need for a good drum sound. Look at Amy Winehouse's Rehab drum sound. That is one microphone.
Really?
That is an SM57 pointed like near the kick drum towards like the middle of the snare, kind of. That's all that is.
That's so sick.
Yep. Yeah. And granted, mic placement matters a lot more when you're only working with one to 3 microphones, right? But
yeah,
if you're not doing a production that's supposed to sound like big radio rock or metal, usually doing the less microphones is the better way to go with it. You'll get a result that sounds more like what you want.
That's amazing.
Remember, depending on the style that you're going for, your technique when it comes to miking drums is going to be so much different.
That's wild. I never would have thought, dude. Every time I think of a mic'd up drum kit, I picture the entire kit. Of course, when
yeah.
I was younger, I would dabble with like one mic here, two mics there.
Yeah.
Of course, I had no idea what I was doing, and mix-wise, no idea then either. Just recording to record. But that's interesting to think that that's actually effective.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it has to do with how you process it after, certainly. But
Yeah.
again, just depending on the style they're going for. I think they did end up sample layering in that production as well. So maybe if you have the extra microphones, having other mics on the shelves so you can add samples in a little easier instead of having to manually put them in. That's probably the way to go. But
what was the song called? You said something by Amy Winehouse?
Yeah, Rehab by Amy Winehouse, her biggest song.
Okay, cool.
Another one to think of is like Tame Impala. I'm pretty sure he just uses a 3-mic setup. I think that's all he uses. Yeah.
His drums are pretty nice sounding.
Yeah.
He has some pretty good productions, honestly. He's great.
He's very, very talented, yeah. So bear that in mind. But Andrew, what did you want to ask about when it comes to the differences between working with live drums and working with sample libraries? You can pick my brain a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like that's a whole lot to unpack. I don't know why, but it seems like it's a big question. But
go for it.
I guess just like in the box, like mixing, or whichever way you think is the most effective to explain it. Like if you're just getting tones or like sources first, then mixing. But I would be more interested on the mixing, how you would do a compression. If I could talk, how you would compress digital versus live, I suppose, or what might be needed to treat it.
Live tends to take more compression because the digital stuff has just already been pre-compressed, right?
Gotcha.
So the live stuff is going to have more dynamics. I have an Octopre daisy chain to my interface, so that has optical compression on it. I'll put a little bit of compression on the way in, just listening, as I'm tweaking it. The light usually isn't even coming on, but I can hear it happening, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
So just to give it a little bit more like movement and punch, and then after it comes in, I'll put on an SSL channel strip generally, compress it with that, usually 4:1 on most sources, sometimes less, adjust the release depending on, what I want. And for most drums, I'm looking at maybe, 0 to -6 dB gain reduction, depending on the source and what I'm looking for. And just the normal SSL stuff, high shelf, low shelf or bell, just as a starting point. That's a good way to do it. Or you can use Get Good Drums, Smash and Grab as another good compressor to throw on there. Just as a that's a good go-to, certainly. That'll get you somewhere pretty quickly, and that has EQ settings built in, which is really, really nice.
So I suppose, what drastic differences do you think there would be? Like, what kind of learning curve would someone face coming from digital like myself for like ages going to live? Of course, the recording learning curve. Would it be like gating, editing, things like that, I suppose, to get things functioning the right way? A good starting point, I suppose.
Editing's tough. You also have to worry about phase. So you have to phase align your sources. I just use a plugin to align my sources, and then if I hear any issues, I'll tweak stuff a little bit just by nudging it. But that's always something you have to worry about.
Totally. And that's just dragging things to be in phase, like you see visually.
Yes. Yeah, because things are going to be, depending on where a microphone is, how far away it is from the drum, how close it is, things are going to hit the microphone at slightly different times. And those time differences add up, especially when you have a whole kit. Things will be really off sounding and weak. You can tell when something's out of phase where it just sounds thin. And sometimes all you have to do is flip the phase, right? Like if you're using a bottom snare mic that's pointing up, and the rest of the drum set mics are pointing down, you're going to have to invert that phase, or else your snare is just going to sound like nothing. It's going to cancel out a lot of the powerful frequencies. Yeah.
That's amazing. They make a plugin that does that for you. Not the flipping, but getting everything in phase. That's so
Actually,
cool.
I think the one that I have might even flip it for me. I don't remember.
That's pretty dope.
Yeah, it's convenient.
Yeah.
Editing takes a while. I think one of the harder things that I dealt with was how to effectively layer samples on top of drums to get them to sound professional, right? Like, it's not as easy as it sounds. You can't just put it on there and then, have the drum be quiet and have the sample be loud. It doesn't really work like that. You have to figure out how to blend the two of them. And sometimes I'll put both of them together into a bus and then process that bus a little bit together. So I'm sometimes gluing them together like that.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
It's just, you got to do what you got to do. The other thing is, some people use Trigger, which I do use, but I use Trigger to capture MIDI information, and then I bounce that MIDI out. And then I put all the drum MIDI for each shell into one MIDI file, and I have that trigger all of the instances of Trigger. So it's not reading it live, because when you use Trigger and you read from something live, it'll actually change. Sometimes it'll be in and out of phase. Like it won't read stuff accurately every time. It's going to be different each time it goes by.
That's weird.
The velocity it plays isn't always going to be the same. I like to have total control, so that's why I have it go to MIDI, put it to MIDI, and then have that MIDI control the instances of Trigger. So the MIDI controls the samples. So I can go in and I could, one, adjust the timing of the MIDI if I feel like it's out of phase sometimes, and then two, adjust the velocity. Because something I've noticed in Trigger is you'll have a drummer doing like a D beat section, just right? Simple stuff. And for some reason the snare will go like soft, soft, loud, soft, soft, loud, loud, soft. It's like all over the place. Huh. And I just like controlling that more, especially in metal where we want most things to be at 127. Except for rolls. Dude. Except for rolls. I want the fills to sound more natural, certainly.
Yeah.
That's mostly what I can think of mix-wise.
I'm sure that it's very technical getting into the nitty-gritty. With different productions come different needs, too.
Certainly. Yeah. Certainly.
It sounds fun, nonetheless.
It's great. It's great fun. It's the most rewarding part of production for me, is getting my drums to sound good.
That's great.
Another thing you could do is you could, because a lot of people, when they track live drums in nicer studios, it's going through a lot of gear. So if you're getting drum tones, you can put on plugins like, Pultex or compressors and stuff like that on the way in to get it to sound more like a drum going through that at a studio. If that makes you more confident while you're tracking, you don't have to do it then, but why not? I mean, there's a video out there of Chris Lord Alge drum tracking, and he goes over all the steps of his process, and you can literally, I've gone down and written down notes like, this is what he did to all these drums, these are the pieces of gear he did, this is around where he boosted. Like, I have a whole sheet full of that shit.
That's awesome.
Yeah, remember what we were talking about last time, where this is an iterative process, right? We're learning from the producers who have come before us. So whenever you get dropped knowledge like that, fucking take that.
You take that up. Oh yeah, I've got a notebook of just little bits and pieces I've heard from people over the years.
Yeah. Something that I noticed that he did a lot was, one, he used a lot of Pultex. Two, he used a DBX 160 on a couple of things. And then he had his drums going into a SSL bus compressor as well on the way in. So he had bus compression on the drums. On some drums, he had different compressors. Other drums, he was just using... the other thing I forgot, he was tracking through a Neve. So it's a Neve board.
Ooh.
He tracks Neve,
sexy.
and then he tracks Neve, and then he mixes SSL, which is a pretty typical thing that people used to do when they had money for it. Yeah, because they both give you a different tone.
Okay, so that's the intention then, is the difference.
Yeah, those tones stacking on top of each other is very desirable.
Okay, cool.
Lastly, the other thing that I noticed that he did that is really useful is that he didn't boost his overheads at all, like the high end on the overheads. He's like, I want to get it so my shells peak out over the overheads before I start EQing the overheads. So I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, that's cool.
All those things added up to be quite interesting. But there's things when you're doing live drums that you just wouldn't think about. Things that until you hear it and you know what to do to fix it, you just don't even recognize that as a problem. Like if your hi-hat sounds like this, right? And like you're cupping your voice, it's like, move your fucking hi-hat mic away from it. You've got it too close, right?
Yeah.
Same with any other drum. If they sound really mid-heavy, it's like, just move the mic back a little bit. You're too close. Yeah. Same concept as with voices, right? The proximity effect on microphones. It's the same exact concept.
That's really interesting. That's cool.
Yeah. That's mostly what I can think of. You got anything else for me? We got time. We can knock this shit out.
I think that kind of did it, man. I feel like that gave me kind of the gist of it.
Cool.
Totally.
Well, why don't we get moving on to our second topic, which is kind of like a sister topic, right?
Yep.
So our second topic is amp sims versus real amps. And what's your opinion on that?
Same with live drums. I haven't used much for real amps in the studio. I've used amp sims 99.9% of the time. And as they have increasingly gotten better over the years, I have grown to love them more for a matter of convenience, especially with the most modern stuff. Naturally, I'm going to say it, the Gojira plugin from Neural DSP.
Wonderful.
Dude, that's just so good. It's so aggressive. It's like butter, like a hot knife in butter. It's just so good. You get different cabs, 3 different cabs. I think one of them's tied with like a clean amp. 2 different high gain amps, different microphones. You can adjust the microphone placement and space, EQs, distortions. I mean, it's the works and it sounds great. But there's still that like part of me that wants to do live stuff still and get some microphones on a cab and experience that.
Well, it's fun, but you run into the same issue that you run into with drums, right? You have to worry about phase. You have to worry about your room. You have to worry about the mics you're using, the cab, speaker, the amp. All of that matters.
Totally.
Just as a warning to anybody using a live amp, I think it's smart to take a DI as well. So always have a DI, just in case the live sound, something fucks up or the artist doesn't like it. Save yourself the pain of having them have to retrack it, which they might not do. And they might not come back to you because of that if you fuck that up. So take the DI, always.
Yep, that's smart. It's a good thing to add.
Yeah. So I've used amp sims and live amps extensively. I mean, I love live amps. They're so fun.
I'm sure.
You just get to, you get more of a sense of depth to them because the room is moving and the mics capture you're just capturing air coming out of a cabinet, into a microphone. So that makes huge difference, certainly, but the cost is extremely prohibitive. I mean,
absolutely.
I was lucky to work at a studio where I didn't, pay for any of that stuff. So we had 4 or 5 different amps. We had a 5150, a Black Star, a Hughes and Kettner. We had lots of expensive amps, a PRS Archon for a while, like just expensive shit, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. It's the other thing is we have expensive mics, right? So without those microphones, just working out of my house, I've actually found it difficult to get the same sounds that I used to get. And it's because I don't have one mic in particular. I have all the other mics I used to have working there, mostly because I bought a lot of them off of the owner when it shut down. But I don't have a Royer 121, which is a ribbon microphone. I think it's about a $1,400 microphone. It's not cheap, certainly.
No.
But without that, I'm struggling to get my live amp tones to sound the way that I remember being able to get, remember getting them. My go-to was either an SM57 or an i5 paired with a Royer 121. I didn't like the 57 that much, kind of harsh. So the i5 I thought was a little better. It had a better curve.
57s are naturally kind of intense on the high end.
Yeah. But i5s, man, they're a little bit more pre-EQ'd, I guess you could say, with their curve.
Okay.
So they get rid of some of the nastier stuff and then the high end smoother, which I really liked about it. Which I also use i5s for snare tops because of that same reason.
There we go. Perfect.
But, cost prohibitive, certainly. If you don't have the right gear, you're going to struggle to get the tones that you want. I've tried to replace that Royer with, a condenser of some kind. It just doesn't work. For my personal guitar sound, I need a Royer 121 and a dynamic microphone. So that's why I have moved away from using live amps more towards digital amps again, because, go figure, the Neural DSP stuff have Royer 121s in them. And when I'm moving the microphone around the amp, it feels like a real Royer 121. It reacts in the same way. So I can
That's really cool.
Yes. So I can get the tone that I'm used to getting. And it sounds, those new Sims are so good. It does sound like the real thing. It is so close to being 1-to-1 at this point that if you can't afford all of the microphones, I don't think your clients are going to complain. I think as long as you get a good guitar tone, nobody gives a shit about how you got it.
I hear that time and time again, dude, from people that come up to record with me. Because I always kind of lay it out to begin with. Like, this is what I'm working with. This is what I can do for you. And they usually come back with, make us sound good. Like, we don't care. Like, we
Yeah.
just want it to sound aggressive or spacey or whatever the vibe is. Like, as long as I can achieve that through a guitar tone, a sim or a real amp, then we're good.
Are you simping for real amps?
I'm simping for real amps, man. I can't help it.
Yeah.
It's out.
Well, I think part of being an engineer is keeping up with newer tools and using them when they become available and learning what they're good for and what they're not good for. And I think it's smart not to limit yourself. There's a lot of people on YouTube, not to name anybody in particular, there's a lot of people on YouTube who are purists who say you have to use live drums, you can't use drum samples.
Yeah.
Those same people will also use amp sims for like their bass, which is like, okay.
What are you talking about then, guy?
All right. But, you know, I think being a purist is stupid. I think if you can get things to sound good, just do that.
Yeah.
The average
especially if you
listener,
get something. Oh, go ahead.
The average listener does not care how you achieved a sound. They just care if it sounds good.
100%, dude. I was going to say the same thing. As long as you can find something that works for you, that sounds good, no one's going to notice.
Yeah. Yeah. So, amp sims, you know, you can get more variety out of them as well.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I gotta cough.
Man, with the realism too. That's great that you kind of brought that up, like the difference between the Royer 121 on the Gojira plugin and the real deal. Because I was going to ask you what similarities you might have noticed.
Very close, yeah. It's
That's
extremely
awesome.
close.
And it just goes to show, like, these sims are great. Like, for any naysayers or like people second guessing, it's worth it, man. Unless you're playing shows. I mean, and even in that case, you know, I'm sure it wouldn't hurt to bring out a laptop, but it's not the vibe at the same time.
Yeah.
As putting on a live performance with the half stack or even a 2x12.
Although,
but it sounds great.
When I saw Meshuggah, they used all Axe effects. So they just had a rack on stage, and Meshuggah had the best live sound out of any band I've ever seen.
Yep, so, just straight to the house mains, dude. It works.
So, you know, who knows? I'm not a purist. If it sounds good, it sounds good.
Love it. Absolutely.
Do I miss working with live amps? Sometimes, yeah. There's something romantic as an engineer about putting up microphones. You know, it's fun. This is why we do it. I feel
that's
like
the sexy part of the job. I feel
playing
like
with microphones is one of the most fun things in this job. It's pure experimentation. Every single time you do it, you're going to try something new. Like, well, maybe I'll do it a little different this time. You know?
Yeah.
Oh, it was a little harsh last time. Why don't I move it off the capsule a little bit and see what that does? And you know, simple stuff like that.
Super cool though.
Yeah. The other good thing about using amp sims, though, is you don't have to worry about a client bringing in a shitty amp and asking to use it.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes, that's a great point.
Yeah. I've had clients bring in all sorts of amps. One client I had wasn't happy with me when he brought in a 6505. He's like, I want to use this. This is what we use live. I'm like, I don't really like those amps. And he like looked at me weird. I'm like, it's fizzy. I don't like it. We had a 5150 there, and the Black Star. I was like, why don't we use one of these? You know, these will both give us a similar sound, and I think they'll sound better on record. I think we ended up using the Black Star, which is hilarious. Like, we ended up using the cheapest amp.
You told me about this album.
Yeah. It was a good fucking amp. I used that a lot. It actually sounded excellent.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but
I wouldn't expect it from Black Star for some reason. I've heard some of their amps in like, well, I can't say it's like a Line 6. I just never was impressed, man. Granted, I never heard any of the larger scale amps. They were pretty small. It was like a 1x12. It's like combo amp, so it wasn't great.
We had a head. I think we had a 50-watt head or something like that.
That's great. There you go. That's way better.
And it was going through V30 speakers, right? So it's going through good speakers, through good gear. But I thought it was very good. I picked it over the 5150 quite often, which was, again, surprising to me. Very surprising to me.
Yeah, same.
But, you know, like we were saying, if it sounds good, who gives a shit?
Yeah, and especially on record.
Yeah. I mean, I tried the 5150 because I do love that amp in certain scenarios, and the amp sims that I love are usually sims of 5150s. But occasionally that's not the sound that I want, you know?
Totally.
That's a very limited amp tonally. It can do one thing and one thing very well.
I get that. Absolutely, dude. I used to desire that amp like a lot. I was like the goal amp with the Ibanez Tube Screamer, the works, dude. And just years of like looking at it on Reverb, thinking, man, I don't have like $2,000 for a singular guitar rig. I broke down and just got like some sims.
Don't go with the Ibanez Tube Screamer. I like the Maxon OD 808. Or is it 808D?
Maxon OD, huh?
Yeah, the Maxon is the original Tube Screamer that Ibanez, I think, either bought or copied. I think it's a little smoother in the top end.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
And I know Ibanez also has a very expensive Tube Screamer that's like $400 or something ridiculous.
Oof.
It is really good sounding. But is it $400, $500 good sounding?
That's pricey.
Yeah,
Get the
Maxon's
Gojira plug-in
100.
for that price and save some money.
Right. But when I use the Maxon, very often I will use the Maxon going into amp sims because I feel like the real Tube Screamer gives me a smoother response on that kind of sound. But granted, it depends on the project. If the client's really serious and they're going to track everything for their album in a day or two, I'll take that out. If they're not able to show up to the studio consistently like that, I'm just going to use an amp sim because there's no fucking way I'm going to get that pedal set up to exactly what it was before and get the tone consistent. And I'm not going to leave that shit out. Like that shit, that takes up space. I have limited space in here, so that board's not just going to be laying around.
It's fun running stuff into your amp sims, dude. I have an art preamp that I've been running like super hot, dude, for high gain into the Gojira plugin. Dude, it just brings out that buzzsaw sound. I definitely recommend someone try that. That was kind of like mind blowing to hear what that did.
I'll have to try that. I have my art preamp, so why not? I'll try that on the way in next time.
It was great, dude.
We'll see.
I had to tighten the gate quite a bit, but it was great.
Yeah. I've been using the Isotope RX plugins like D-Hum and D-Noise so I can get rid of a lot of that gunk, and that's helped me a lot. That's gotten my tones to be less noisy overall, especially with my cleaner tones, because single coils near a computer,
fire.
Noisy.
Oh, it's bad.
Yeah,
so bad.
Yeah. Just part of being alive today. Part of being a producer in the modern era is, your guitar's going to be right there next to it.
Yeah, that's the beauty, though. Then you get tools like RX that are just pure magic that come along and save the day. It's incredible how those work.
RX has saved this podcast.
That's great.
There was that one episode where my mic, I had it set to the clock source being internal rather than ADAT, and I'm going through an ADAT, extension to the interface, and so it was just popping. It was like every couple seconds. RX saved it. I put it on there. It fixed it. You can't even tell. I dare people to find the episode that happened on because you probably won't be able to tell.
Oh, dude, that's so cool. How does that even work?
Wizardry.
That's craziness.
Absolute wizardry.
Dude.
Yeah.
That's one hell of an algorithm. That's nuts.
Yeah. Another thing I like about amp sims is how you're able to change your impulse response on your cab or try out different cabs really easily.
Oh yeah,
that's also really cool because
cabs make a massive difference, dude.
They are arguably more important than the amp because any high gain amp into a cab will sound somewhat similar, but the cab can dramatically shape the tone. Oh,
100%, dude. The mic and the cab, I feel like are so much more important.
Absolutely. So that's another benefit of amp sims. Again, just accessibility. You can try out new things very, very quickly.
They make some great bass amp sims too. The Parallax plugin from Neural is quite good.
That does seem cool, but here, I'm going to show what I use for bass. Does seem cool, but sometimes you can't beat the real deal gear. Get yourself a good, dark glass or a good Sans amp. You can't beat it.
You have the Sans amp, don't you?
I have the Sans amp VT Bass Deluxe, which is my favorite Sans amp. It gets you that clank, that tone you're looking for.
Just a great sound, dude. Yeah, if you can get the real deal, get the real deal. And I believe that pedal's only a couple of $100, isn't it? Like $250.
It's not too expensive. Let's check what a VT Bass. Sans
I remember you telling me about it not too long ago, and I was really like, who doesn't want that clanky bass tone, that like high gain good sound? It was like
I got it. I got it for a really good price too. I think I got it for like $150. So I see it. It's out of stock right now, so I see it for. I see the deluxe one that I use on sale for about $275 to $320. So not horrible,
That's dope for a good bass tone. Like that's not bad.
For something that I use every single session, that is my go-to because it has like that character knob can do so many things. You can make it more like a subtle, warm bass tone. You can make it clanky and high-endy. There's a lot you can do with that. So I've never found a situation where putting that in the chain has resulted in a worse tone. It almost always makes it better. Yeah.
For $300. Like that's cool.
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Parallax seems really good. No hate on it. It seems a bit more sterile sounding,
It can be. Absolutely. I doctor it up a little bit more. Like same thing as like running a preamp into it. Like I'll put the slate mix rack with the preamp going into it, or Fab Filter Saturn even, and it kind of it helps. It doesn't completely fix the problem, but it does add a little bit of something extra to it.
That brings us into the next thing that we have here, which is how to make amp sims sound more realistic.
Since there we go. That's talking perfect. About it. Already started.
yeah, because that's so difficult, right?
It can be.
Amp sims historically used to have a lot harsher high-end fizz than they do now. So when I was younger, to make Pod Farm sound good, I used to have to do things like low pass the fuck out of it, and like
then like 3K, use crazy big,
use like tape or something on it to try to like give it different kinds of high end fizz that sounded a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
I don't find myself having to doctor up guitars quite as much now. I mean, I've actually even moved away from using tape on my guitars. I liked it before, and then recently my buddy was like, try a distressor on opto mode, and I did, and I'm like, whew, boy.
That's cool. I'm going to give that a shot.
It's really good, actually.
Wow. Do you do any reduction with it? And is it post or?
Very tiny amount of reduction, yeah. It's on the bus. Or you could use, Joel Wanasek guitars, which I've also used that. Sometimes I'll use Joel Wanasek guitars and the distressor. So why not?
That's great. Yeah, mess around. Who cares? I mean, it probably sounds great. I can imagine. You speak super highly of the Joel Wanasek guitars.
It's amazing because it has that chug slayer option, which, is like I believe it's a dynamic band for the lower mids of your guitar. So when you chug, it doesn't get overbearing. And I used to have to do that manually. And now I have a plugin that I just click one button and it fixes it for me. Like,
oh, that's dope.
Amazing.
That's
right?
Great. Is it literally like one button, or can you set like a frequency range, like 400 down, and
nope,
it just knows? That's cool.
Just one button. Whatever it's doing, it works.
Wow.
And it's made for metal, so it's pretty smart. Whatever it's doing,
they know what they need.
Whatever it's doing, it is doing a damn good job of it. So I have no complaints about that plugin.
On the topic of high end on guitars, dude, I feel like on the Neural plugin, when I'm getting like a good chuggy tone, I feel like I find myself boosting the presence knob, or like the 8K.
Yeah.
Sometimes 4K. Not very often. 4K hits my ear weird, but the high end I boost a lot more than I used to with Pod Farm. And it's quite the contrary there.
Pod Farm was fizzy. Neural reacts more like a real amp. Probably has something to do with the oversampling algorithm they're using, so the distortion isn't so nasty sounding. But because when you're using a real amp for metal, you're going to boost the treble and the presence. I mean, you're going to do that in the mix. Just take care of it while you're tracking, right?
Yep.
So like we've been saying, the plugins are getting a lot closer to real life now. I feel like it's not that hard to get a tone that sounds real now. But again, if you run into trouble, things like tape, saturation of some kind, that could help. Although distorted guitar, you probably don't need to saturate it very much. It's probably already saturated.
Not much. Maybe on the bus, that's kind of fun.
Sure, why not?
There was a trick you were talking about a while ago where you put JST clip before the amp sim and you clip the DI, and I did that a couple of times, and I gotta say I kind of like that.
I don't always do it.
Adds some like aggressiveness. I feel like it almost like loses something in the lows. Something's just not still there, but like the overall balance of it, and like it feels good.
I did that when I encountered problems, and I did it probably incorrectly when I was younger, where I got weaker sounding DI, so I boosted them with JST clip. And it was actually when I did your band a long time ago.
That was a while ago.
Yeah, what was that, like 7 years ago almost? A very long time.
I think so, dude. Yeah, it's like 2013, 2014.
And I know we've told this story in another podcast, but you recorded through a UX1 or something cheaper, so the DI was very weak. And I used JST clip without even really thinking about it because I was young. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I'm like, okay, boost it. Let's make it hit the amp harder, and it sounded good. So in hindsight, that's cool. I learned something cool just by bumbling into it.
Yep. That's the beauty of it, dude. I love happy accidents like that.
Happy accidents, certainly. Yeah. Oh, shit. You got anything else to add, buddy?
Oh, man. No, man, that was a whole lot of digital. That was a whole lot of guitar amps. That was a whole lot of fun right there.
I keep showing my belly by accident. I keep stretching and showing my stomach. Oh, no.
Hello.
I'm skinny, I swear. Yeah, that's a topic for another episode. How to stay healthy when you sit in front of a computer all day.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great one, man.
Yeah. Eat well. Eat well. That's the biggest one.
Gut health is directly linked to mental health.
Yeah, but anyway, let's wrap it there. We've gotten to about 50, 52 minutes, probably 51 minutes because we started it like a minute or two in.
Awesome.
I'm surprised we got this far, this well, considering how sick I am. So
I know. Thank God, man. Hopefully
Andrew,
you start feeling better soon.
Thank you. Do you have any new projects to plug?
Definitely check out that band Dead Crown. I'm recording a buddy. His name is Reldnock, and then a record I'm doing with a band called Hella Metal that's coming out here pretty soon.
Okay. Can you send me links to that so I can put them in the description?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And in terms of me, I don't have a whole lot going on right now, but that's fine.
That's fine. You're sick. You're not supposed to be doing much.
Yeah. What you can do for me, I have a new website. So if you guys want to check that out, hear some of my work, maybe even book something with me, like I can mix your band, feel free to go to that, check it out, email me. Anyway, thanks for stopping by, guys. I'm sick. I can barely think anymore. It's been an hour of talking, so I'm probably going to go relax. See you guys.
Off to sleep. Later.